And these symptoms are caused by stress, either in the present day or from the past. Many people with this condition, their major stresses occurred in childhood. And it turns out those stresses can physically alter the anatomy of the nerve pathways in the brain.
Cue music. Places, everybody places. We're starting in 3, 2.
It's time for Life Interrupted Radio, a show dedicated to practical skills for your mind, body, and soul. We're hoping we'll go in one ear and stay there. Here's the host of the show, Sharon Sayler.
Welcome to the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio, where we look at the rise of autoimmune disorders. The NIH estimates nearly 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder. To put that in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. You'll be as surprised as I was to find out what autoimmune entails. I brought together top experts that range from doctors, specialists, nutritionists, researchers, and even those recovering from autoimmune to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information about autoimmunity and how to live your life uninterrupted. So let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio. I'm your host, Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com. My goodness, it's my Friday. I hope it's your Friday, too. I mean, the start of a weekend, start of some time off. What do you have fun planned? I'm all about doing whatever you can do to bring joy and enjoyment to your life, regardless of your diagnosis. That's the way we really begin to thrive, is finding ways to bring joy into our lives, whether it's something really small or it can be really big. I don't have anything really big planned this weekend. I have some fun things planned with my granddaughter, so that always brings me a lot of joy. Let's take a moment, just take a nice deep breath and relax and cozy in. And I've got a fabulous, you've heard me talk about it before, this green tea with jasmine that the lovely lady from London sent me. I just find it so refreshing. You know, it's one of the smoothest tasting teas I've ever had. So I'm going to curl up with that tonight. What are you curled up with? And you know what? I've got one of my favorite all-time guests on the show. I have to tell you, I've read and reread his book, and I am a fan of a book. When I put little Post-its all over a book, those little plastic tabs, and I don't know, I'm looking at his book here, and there's probably 30 or more. So that's a sign of a good book, right? When you've got it's not a long book. Let me look here. About 200 pages, I guess, and you've got over 30, 35, 40 tabs in there. That's a sign of a good book, isn't it? I bought 8 copies of this book, plus the one I own, for friends and family members that I thought would enjoy it. And what I find so fascinating about it is that each one of them will email me with something that they learned in the book, or more than something. Sometimes it's 3 or 4, 5, 6 things. And what is so fascinating to me is I'm like, wow, I didn't get that out of the book. I didn't see that in the book. And that's what I find fascinating, is that everybody finds what they're needing in the book. And so that's why I invited Dr. David Clarke to be on the show. He's the author of They Can't Find Anything Wrong, 7 Keys to Understanding, Treating, and Healing Stress Illness. And Dr. Clarke is the president, I always mispronounce this, Dave. Can you pronounce it for me? The Disorders Association, the
Psychophysiologic Disorders Association. We came up with that name after a lot of debate amongst about 6 or 8 experts, and we're using it mostly for communication between healthcare professionals. It's not a great word for the public, I have to admit.
Well, it's a tongue twister for sure. And let me give you a bit more of his background, because he's got an amazing background. He's a clinical assistant professor of gastroenterology emeritus at the Oregon Health and Sciences University in Portland, Oregon. He's a board certified in gastroenterology and internal medicine and practiced gastroenterology in Portland from 1984 to 2009. And he's been a visiting professor at the Royal Children's Hospital in Australia and at Oxford University in England. He has conducted detailed interviews with over 7,000 patients whose pain and other symptoms were not explained by diagnostic tests. And the results have been summarized in his great book, They Can't Find Anything Wrong. And I'm so thrilled to have captured him because he lectures internationally and has appeared on over 100 television and radio broadcasts. And, you know, he's fabulous to hear, and I've got to jump right in. First, Dave, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And as you know, I've bought 8 copies of the books for friends and family, and what fascinates me, and I'm sure you're probably nodding your head like that's not uncommon, is that everybody is finding something different in the book.
Yeah, well, I tried to capture the essence of the stories of my patients. And I think whenever you honestly convey a human story as directly as you can from the person's own words, that it's going to resonate in different ways with different readers in ways that I'm not able to predict all the time. I did try to choose stories that represented the full spectrum of different kinds of stresses that can make people physically ill with real live symptoms. And then there's 4 dozen or so different stories in there. Beyond that, people have to interpret that information within the context of their own lives. The potential for different impacts on different people is quite large.
It is. And you know what was fascinating to me is, I have to be honest, I'm not really a fan of vignettes. When I'm reading a lot of nonfiction works like business or whatever books, I sort of skip over or just skim over the stories, the vignettes, the little call-outs, sometimes they call it. But your book, what was fascinating to me as I was reading through, and then I started into the different stories, because like you said, there are a lot of stories in here. I loved it because at some level, even if I'm like, that doesn't really relate physically to me, that isn't related to my symptoms, whatever, I could relate at a very deep level to all of the different people that you chronicle in here and come up with like, wow, isn't that interesting? And in some of those, I went, you know, my friend so-and-so needs this book, and so I got a copy of them. Didn't really point out the story, hoping that they would see the story themselves and relate it to themselves. But I know we're going to talk on 2 levels here, because you and I have had some private conversations about your book and autoimmunity. So let's talk a little bit about this idea. In some stories, the people just had, I'll call an aha moment, where they realized, wow, maybe stress, maybe past things could be causing some or all of my physical problems. Let's talk at that level, and then we'll get a little deeper into how your book relates to people with autoimmunity. So tell us a little bit about what is stress illness and why is it so baffling?
Well, stress illness consists of real physical symptoms. It could be pain. It could be literally symptoms from head to toe. People can get itching in the skin. It can be gastrointestinal symptoms, difficulty breathing, difficulty swallowing, ringing in the ears, visual disturbances, numbness and tingling in the skin, itching of the skin, headaches, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, pain in the pelvis, bladder spasms. I mean, the list of symptoms, low back pain, I shouldn't leave that one out. That's one of the most common. But the list of symptoms is virtually endless. They are absolutely real. They're just as real as symptoms caused by organ diseases or by structural abnormalities. And yet, when the physician does diagnostic tests and looks for a cause, they typically don't find anything, or maybe they find a minor abnormality that's not really related to the symptoms at all. And these symptoms are caused by stress, either in the present day or from the past. Many people with this condition, their major stresses occurred in childhood. And it turns out those stresses can physically alter the anatomy of the nerve pathways in the brain that can affect how physical sensations are perceived, and that is the underlying structural cause of these symptoms. And the treatment, it turns out, is to help people recognize what those stresses are, because most people with this condition aren't fully aware of the power and impact of the stresses that they're afflicted with. So the first step is to help people to see what it is that they're really coping with, and then to convert the bodily manifestation of that stress into words, to have people write or speak about the stresses in a way that can relieve the symptoms. So that's the good news here, is that we have a pathway toward helping people recover, sometimes very dramatically. The first story in my book, as you know, is a woman who was hospitalized at a major university 4 times a year for 15 years with no diagnosis, and she was actually fully cured after about an hour of conversation. So occasionally we do get very dramatic improvements, but even people who take longer, at least they can see that they are on the right path, and that's huge for people who've been looking for answers for years.
Absolutely. And what I was fascinated with was some of the stories, and these are my words. I'm just sort of paraphrasing here, folks. One of the things that I realized as I was reading through a lot of these stories were, I'm going to say, maybe resentments is the wrong word, but definitely trapped emotions or stuffed emotions were related to a lot of these stories. They had these aha moments where they'd been carrying some sort of hurt or grudge or a fear or anything like that. And what was startling to me was when in some of the stories that people, yeah, but that was 10 years ago, or that was, my childhood and I'm 50 or 60 or whatever. And it was amazing to me how it's not a direct cause and effect. I mean, once it's uncovered, it's obvious, but it's very difficult to figure out sometimes because it can be such a long time sometimes between the causation of the stress and the tension and the actual physical symptom.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest shocks of my medical education and my experience in this field is that many people with this condition, their illness begins only in midlife. That they may have been perfectly well, and then somebody who was under stress as a child, it's decades later when their illness begins. The very first patient that I ever diagnosed this condition in was mistreated as a child, and 25 years after that mistreatment had stopped is when she became ill for the first time. And that just didn't seem possible and nothing in my medical training up to that point had even allowed for that as a possibility. But it was proven to be the case when the psychiatrist who became one of my early mentors in this field cured the patient with a couple of months of counseling. And that just blew my mind, that you could have a patient who was as ill as that woman was and had no explanation for her symptoms and yet be cured with 8 or 10 weeks of therapy sessions. And the reason for this is that when you're growing up in a stressful environment, in order to survive, typically you have to take the emotions that you're feeling as a child who's being mistreated and stuff them away somewhere. You've got to find a way to, you can't typically run away from your family because you need them for support. So you're basically stuck there, and you've got to find a way to cope with your emotional reaction to what's happening to you. And so children get very skilled at stuffing those emotions away, and then it's sometimes only years later that they begin to experience those emotions again, or at least they come knocking on the door. And that knocking can be the physical symptoms. So in one way, we can think of these physical illnesses when they result from childhood stress as a way of the body trying to communicate with us, to let us know that there are issues that need attention. And in that way, the illness is actually beneficial. It signals to us that there's unfinished business that needs to be taken care of. And it turns out this is enormously common. Childhood stress was heavily involved in the illness in over half of the 7,000 plus patients that I treated over the years.
Wow. Wow. Now, I've got like 5 questions I wrote down as I was listening to you there, but it's just like, but what about? But I want to make sure that the listener, they haven't had a chance to read your book yet, is you cover from, I'll say, the 30,000 foot level, 5 major things that you found. First, the adverse childhood experience, and then there were 4 others. Can you go over the major areas where you have found that this appears?
You bet. The other 4 are actually fairly simple. The first one is probably the most obvious. It's just stress that's going on in your life at the moment. And, if it's bad and it can happen to a human being, I've probably seen it cause illness in somebody somewhere. It could be a personal crisis. It could be something in your marriage or with your children or with your parents or with a neighbor or in the workplace is another one. Religious faith is often involved in patients' concerns because that's such a source of powerful emotions itself. The other 3 are mental health conditions that can manifest themselves primarily physically, and the fact that you've got a mental health condition may not be all that obvious either to you or to your physician, but depression, post-traumatic stress, and anxiety disorders can all manifest primarily as physical symptoms in some people. Many of my patients who suffered from depression, when I asked them straight out, do you feel depressed? They said no, because they didn't have that subjective sense of being depressed. They might have felt stressed out or frustrated or exasperated. They might have felt like they were at the end of their rope in some sense, but the subjective sense of depression they really didn't feel. And yet they had many other symptoms that we know are associated with depression, such as difficulty sleeping, losing interest in activities they formerly enjoyed, having their appetite and energy levels fall off. And when they were treated for depression, their physical symptoms improved. Post-traumatic stress is pretty obvious if there was a terrifying or horrifying event that the person went through right before their symptoms began. But in quite a number of my other patients, there was a trauma, but it took place long before the symptoms began. And in those people, we have to look for a triggering event of some kind, something that was linked to the trauma that did happen right before the onset of the symptoms and served as a trigger for those symptoms. Probably the simplest example was a patient of mine who was sexually assaulted a dozen or so years before her symptoms began. And she never went to see a therapist about this. She was struggling with many of the common symptoms of post-traumatic stress, such as nightmares and flashbacks. And finally, she broke down and went to see somebody to get some help. And it was such a difficult experience that she ended up actually vomiting all over the therapist's carpet. And the very next morning, she developed abdominal pain that was stress-related. So that was clearly the triggering event was that therapeutic encounter, which was actually beneficial for her. It just stirred up a lot of emotions. And then the final is the anxiety disorders. And many people have been so anxious for so long that they don't recognize it. They don't realize that they're functioning at a high level of tension. And the clue oftentimes in these patients is that their symptoms are much better or even absent whenever they are in what they consider to be a safe environment. So there was one of my patients who's a good example of this. She had attacks of severe abdominal cramps, and these were happening 2 or 3 times a week, but she never had them at home. And she was spending 50% of her time, more or less, at home. So statistically, she should have had 50% of her attacks at home, but she didn't. And so that was clearly anxiety related to being away from home, being out in the world, which for someone with an anxiety disorder can serve as a trigger.
Wow. We'll be back right after this quick commercial break.
Life Interrupted Radio will return after these messages from our sponsors. It's great sponsors like these that keep this show coming to you every week. Be sure and stop by lifeinterruptedradio.com to learn more. This episode is brought to you by mindfulnessinactionbook.com. To get your free 4-minute guided meditation to relax, refresh, and renew in just 4 minutes, and who doesn't have 4 minutes? Stop by mindfulnessinactionbook.com now. This guided meditation is in handy MP3 format, so you can use it anywhere, anytime. Download it now at mindfulnessinactionbook.com.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living, a chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me, and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
I am Fidel Mshombo. I was born in a city called the Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America, and all your problems are done. They don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back, everyone. From that quick commercial break, I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com, and we're here with Dr. David Clarke, author of They Can't Find Anything Wrong. And we were talking right before that quick break that we had to take about triggers and stress illness. So now, see, I've got so many questions, miles and miles of questions. So, but I want to talk about that patient right there. So how do we look for patterns? Obviously, you uncovered the pattern of it would never happen at home, and statistically, the abnormality of that's kind of odd. Do you make suggestions on us to write down when we think a symptom is happening, or how do we uncover these patterns to help us go, well, maybe it is stress-related?
Well, this is one of the things that I teach healthcare professionals about this condition, is that the very first step is to try to develop a chronology of the illness. When and where did the symptoms begin? What was going on in your life right at the time the symptoms began or immediately prior to the symptoms beginning? Is there any pattern with when these symptoms flare up? Can you identify any events in your life that have occurred right before the symptoms become worse? Now, there isn't always a pattern that's obvious. Many people with stress-related illness, the symptoms come and go in relation to what's happening subconsciously, and there's no rhyme or reason that connects it with what's happening, your visible life, let's call it that. But it's still a worthwhile exercise, at least to check and see if you can connect these symptoms with significant events in your life. One of my patients who had, to make a long story short, major difficulties in her relationship with her father and tried to avoid him. Well, he had a stroke and he needed her for support, and so suddenly she found herself having to be in his presence 3, 4, 5 days a week, and it was right at that time that her illness began. So we could make a direct connection with that major stress in her life. Another patient of mine only had her symptoms 3 different times in her life. Age 22, when she moved away from her home in the rural Midwest to begin working as a nurse at a major urban hospital at age 22. And then at age 31, she had her symptoms again. She was getting divorced at that time. And then finally, the third time the symptoms flared up, she was age 37. And unfortunately, she was getting divorced again. So those 3 times, obviously the major stressful times in her life happened to be the exact same time she was having her symptoms. So if you can find a pattern like that, it gives you a big clue.
Wow. Now, I want to bring up a couple of patterns that surprised me. Maybe they're not truly patterns. You have stories in here about, I'm paraphrasing again, but this I deserve better. trigger and the also what I call good relationship, bad symptom trigger, which I found both of those very fascinating, especially the good relationship, bad symptoms, where someone gets out of the stressful relationship, in my mind as I was reading it, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are able to let go or release or relax, and then all of a sudden they get ill. Now that was fascinating to me too.
Yes, it seems paradoxical that when you are in a place in your life where things are going well, perhaps you are in the first mutually supportive relationship in your life, or you have otherwise achieved some life-affirming goals in your life, and that would seem to be the last thing in the world that would trigger any symptoms. But in fact, if you are somebody who has survived childhood stress, particularly if you grew up in an environment that made you feel like a second-grade human being, and now all of a sudden you've got somebody in your life that is very positive towards you, perhaps for the very first time, or you've achieved some goals in life that make it clear that you're actually a pretty wonderful human being, well, those things are contradictory. That if you grew up getting the message over and over again that you are an inferior person, you're a second-rate person, the boundaries of your body don't need to be respected, it's your task in life to take care of everybody else and ignore yourself. If you got those kinds of messages, and now all of a sudden you're in a place in your life where you have somebody in your life that is very positive towards you, it's a contradiction, and you have to suddenly start thinking about, well, is this person that I'm with who is so wonderful towards me, are they going to wake up one morning and realize that I'm really an inferior person and they're going to just leave me and move on? So there's an anxiety around that. But even more so, if even more powerful source of symptoms is if you accept the fact that you actually are a wonderful human being, then it means that you didn't deserve all the negative treatment you received earlier in your life. And that stirs up emotions. All the emotions of anger and resentment and sometimes fear, shame, guilt, or grief can be stirred up by this. The emotions that you learned over and over again how to bury and stuff away when you were growing up, now all of a sudden they're knocking at the door, because you can't accept how badly you were treated if you've got somebody in your life that is insisting that you're a wonderful person. So there's that contradiction, tends to stir up emotions. But these are emotions that, you learned over and over again to keep suppressed. And so they need to find a way out. And very often the way they find out is through your body. And that's when the symptoms begin. I will always remember one patient, happened to be examining her abdomen, and I noticed this, rather large diamond ring that she had, and it turned out that this was, an engagement ring from her fiance that she had received 2 days before her illness began. And it turned out he was the best person she'd ever had in her life. All of her other relationships, she was in her mid-30s. Her previous relationships with men had been disastrous, and this was a really wonderful man that she was with now. And when she accepted his proposal, 2 days later, her illness began. And that was a classic example of what I call the good partner, bad illness syndrome, because all the emotions from her mistreatment as a child were starting to knock on the door and express themselves via her body.
Wow. That is just amazing to me. We need to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to continue with Dr. David Clarke, the author of They Can't Find Anything Wrong, and we're going to get more into how autoimmunity conditions can or do they play into it. We'll ask that question when we come back from this quick commercial break.
Life Interrupted Radio will return after these messages from our sponsors. It's great sponsors like these that keep this show coming to you every week. Be sure and stop by lifeinterruptedradio.com to learn more.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
What are all the things you witness online in a day? Cats playing piano, selfies on your feed, your friend's picture being turned into a nasty meme that's been shared 50 times, 51, 52. When someone's being bullied online, it's hard to know what to do. Now you can speak up with the witness emoji. It looks like an eye in a speech bubble, and it's in the symbol section near the clocks in your phone. You'll let the world know it isn't cool, and you'll let your friend know you care. Learn more at eyewitnessbullying.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This episode is brought to you by mindfulnessinactionbook.com. To get your free 4-minute guided meditation to relax, refresh, and renew in just 4 minutes, and who doesn't have 4 minutes? Stop by mindfulnessinactionbook.com now. This guided meditation is in handy MP3 format, so you can use it anywhere, anytime. Download it now at mindfulnessinactionbook.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Sharon Sayler, your host for this episode of the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio. I'm here with Dr. David Clarke. He is the author of the fascinating and really great book, They Can't Find Anything Wrong, 7 Keys to Understanding, Testing, and Healing Stress Illness. As I mentioned in the opening, I have bought this book, 8 copies plus my own, given it to friends and families that I thought could use it or be fascinated by it. They would have some aha moments like I did. And one of the things that I have found fascinating was that everybody found something different in the book related to their own moments of stress or anxiety, whatever it was. We all have stress and anxiety, and we all react to it differently. And I want to bring up, Dave, this chapter 8, where you talk about multi-factored stress illness and also the idea of autoimmune conditions, and how stress can play a part in your healing from those.
Well, certainly the multi-factored is a group of patients who suffered from more than one source of stress at a time. And it's not certainly unusual for someone who experienced childhood stress, for example, to be experiencing stress in their current day life. For example, the person who perpetrated the adversity on you when you were growing up may still be in your life. It's not unusual for my patients who are adults to still be interacting with the parent or parents who mistreated them, for example. It's also not at all uncommon for people who were mistreated as children to be suffering from depression or anxiety or even post-traumatic stress. So those things can all interact with each other when they're present at the same time and make things worse. With respect to autoimmunity, it's only in the last few years that we're beginning to learn about the impact of stress, particularly stress in childhood, on diseases that we can diagnose with diagnostic tests. And my book focuses on people whose diagnostic tests do not reveal any structural or organ disease abnormality that's causing their symptoms. But it turns out that childhood stress is associated, at least statistically, with a number of organ diseases, and among those are autoimmunity. The study that I'm thinking of that makes this connection the most clear is one that showed that for every additional category of adversity that you suffered as a child, there's a 20% greater risk of being hospitalized for an autoimmune condition. So, for example, if you've got if you have experienced as a child each of 5 different categories out of 10 that are typically measured, if you have 5 or more categories of childhood adversity in your life, then you are twice as likely to be hospitalized for an autoimmune condition as somebody who had none of that childhood adversity. And that leads to, speculation about, how that could be. What is doing this? And the thinking at the moment is that stress fires up your immune system as a way of, the body trying to protect itself against adversity, and that there are certain inflammatory, let's call them hormones, that are released that can set up a higher level of inflammation in the body that may, over a period of decades, play itself out into the creation of an autoimmune disease. And it turns out to be a factor that can lead to any of a variety of different forms of autoimmune disease as well. The research didn't specify which type of autoimmune disease was leading to you being hospitalized. So this is a fascinating connection between early stress in childhood, and a real live organ disease during the adult years.
Wow, that's amazing to me. This is just the science of Sharon, folks. This isn't Dave's work or anything, but I hear from a lot of you out there, obviously anecdotal on my part. I am not at all surprised that was a finding in the study. Whether it's a factor in our autoimmunity or we're relating that we have a stress illness, what are some things that you have found? Because I'm thinking even if it is a contributing factor to autoimmunity, if we're able to give voice to it, to work with it, maybe we can relieve part of our symptoms or just feel better at some level and be able to give voice to it.
Well, each one of the 5 major types of stresses, has its own treatment approach, but it begins with identifying what the particular stresses are in your life. And many of my patients have benefited simply from sitting down and making a list of every stress they can think of that they're dealing with, not only at the moment, but that they have had to cope with in the past. And once a person sits down and starts to write that list, the writing has an almost magical ability to pull back memories from the past and even the present. And just simply writing all those things down in one place can get people thinking about, first of all, the full impact of everything that they've suffered over the years. And then second, it starts the brain thinking about solutions. For example, if you were mistreated by a parent or parents and you're still interacting with those people today, you may begin to think about changing the nature of those interactions, perhaps limiting those interactions, setting up some boundaries so that you're not interacting with somebody who committed adversity towards you in the past. There are also writing exercises that I have my, what we call ACE survivors do. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and it's a common term amongst professionals who work in this field. There's even an excellent website called acesconnection.com. And one of the exercises I had people do is write a letter to the ACE perpetrator, not to mail it, just to write it, and putting down all your thoughts and emotions about that person. And again, once people start writing, oftentimes the emotions begin to flow. And the more of those emotions you can put down onto a piece of paper or type onto a computer screen, the less of those emotions there are to be expressed via the body and cause symptoms. So absolutely, it's possible for people to get better, feel better from this condition. With respect to the autoimmunity, we don't have the research data to know if we can alter that outcome or alter the progress of that condition. Certainly do believe that it's possible. We'll have to wait for proof. It's possible that once that inflammatory process is set up in the early years, that it's going to play itself out, and that the kinds of psychological interventions that work so well for my patients with stress-related illness may not work as well for autoimmune disease that's already up and rolling. But, it's also certainly possible that the inflammatory process could be impacted by psychological treatment. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if that proved to be the case. We'll have to wait for the research, but in the meantime, I would absolutely use the same approaches that have worked for stress illness for people that are suffering from these other conditions as well.
As someone who has autoimmune, I have to say, absolutely, from my perspective, I read the book, I loved it, I worked on some of the exercises in the book, and I found, I'm not cured, I know that, but I found it very helpful. And it was even just relieving. If you get a moment of relief, to me, if someone who has experienced autoimmune, I think my audience would be nodding their head here going, even if it's 1 or 2 or 3% difference, it's still a big difference to us that have the autoimmune condition. So that's what I love about the work. And the other thing I love about it is it's not taking another drug with side effects or, trading symptoms for side effects. To me, it's worth exploring. Hey, it's worth a shot, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think... there is one study from 2003, I remember, that the researcher is very well respected in the field of gastroenterology, and he had a patient who was very, very ill with irritable bowel syndrome, and they studied the nerve pathways in her brain that we know are capable of altering the processing of pain signals. And it turned out that, at least in this one patient, that as she got better with psychological treatment, those nerve pathways were changed from the unhealthy circuits to healthy ones. So that was the first demonstration that I'm aware of that showed a real anatomic change coming about from psychological treatment. And that gives me a lot of hope that we're going to find similar kinds of changes, perhaps in the immune system, perhaps in the inflammatory hormones that I spoke of earlier. The field is just ready to explode with new research now that we're uncovering some of the anatomic and physiologic underpinnings of what's making people ill from stress.
Wow, this is amazing, Dr. Dave. It's so exciting about new research. We need to take another quick commercial break, folks. We'll be right back.
Connecting you with the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Change and growth are part of natural life, and also part of your spiritual life. Everyone needs support and guidance, especially during life passages. Upgrade yourself with the OMTimes Experts program. With OMTimes Experts, you have access to the best intuitive coaches, spiritual teachers, counselors, astrologists, and oracles. Our team was carefully selected so you can trust. Find out more at experts.omtimes.com.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Hey, Dr. Phil here. I help people solve difficult problems every day, but one problem has me stumped: childhood hunger. Nearly 16 million children in America struggle with it. Luckily, the Feeding America network of local food banks collects surplus food, giving hope to hungry children and their families. But they need your help. Join me in supporting Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Do you want to be a better leader, have better relationships, become more self-aware, be a better communicator? Hi, I'm Sharon Sayler, best-selling author, professional speaker, and executive coach. And my life passion is empowering professionals to be the best that they can be. After years of working with professionals, I've discovered the 7 things nobody is telling you that can cost you your clients, sales, and even your career. And I want to give it to you free. You've heard my show, you know my passion, and maybe we'll be working together sooner rather than later. So go grab this ebook now to find out the 7 things that's costing you big time over at SharonSayler.com/radio gift. Welcome back, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio. I'm your host, Sharon Sayler, and I'm here with Dr. David Clarke, author of the book, They Can't Find Anything Wrong. And we've been talking about this idea of stress and adverse experiences in your life. Could they be causing some of your symptoms? Now, I want to bring up one comment I heard from someone I gave the book to, and I wasn't surprised by the comment. Maybe you've heard it before. As they read the book, I have to be honest, they said, but it's not all in my head, and the book is saying it's all in my head. And now that's their interpretation of it. But there was a real resistance. I heard this like, no, I can't be needing a therapy session or counseling. It's not in my head. I'm actually having true physical symptoms. And there was a real reluctance or resistance to even consider that it could play a part even. Have you ever run into that before?
Oh, I ran into it with myself when I was a beginner in this field. I said to myself, you can't possibly make somebody this ill just from stress, this much pain or this much change in their bowel function or their skin sensations or their swallowing. There was nothing in the first 7 years of my professional training that said that it was remotely conceivable. But it turns out that yes, the change in the nerve pathways in the brain, which is a real anatomic difference, and has been found in a number of studies now, is fully capable of causing symptoms that are absolutely just as real and can be just as severe as symptoms caused by organ diseases or structural abnormalities. But it's hard to believe that this is possible. And I'm very sympathetic with my patients who are skeptical, and all I ask is that they keep an open mind, that they follow the treatment pathways and recommendations that have worked for thousands of my patients, and they have nothing to lose. If it doesn't work, they're no worse off. With many people, they see the beginnings of an improvement with this approach, and once they see that they're on a pathway toward recovery that none of their other treatments has been able to produce, they're encouraged to continue.
Absolutely, and I encourage you to get Dr. Clarke's book. It's They Can't Find Anything Wrong, 7 Keys to Understanding, Treating, and Healing Stress Illness. I promise not to keep him too long because he's a super busy guy. You can tell he's got so much to offer the world and he's out there sharing it. But before we go, I want you to share, in the very beginning of the book, you have this checklist for working with doctors. So if any of this has resonated with a listener out there, what are some ways we can bring this up to maybe our primary care or our rheumatologist?
I think you can start with just asking if it's possible that stress could be a component, a part of the symptoms that you're experiencing. If the physician says, no, absolutely not, we know that your symptoms are 100% related to an organ disease or a structural abnormality, then you've got some evidence from a doctor who knows you that stress is less likely to be a factor. But having said that, even today, very few physicians are trained to evaluate for that stress component of the illness, and they vary quite a bit from doctor to doctor on how experienced and interested they are in this aspect of medicine. I've had many patients over the years who've been told that, for example, their back pain is due to a disc problem. And in fact, there is research that's from 20 years ago now that shows that many people, especially people over the age of 50, have minor disc abnormalities in their spine, and they're just a normal feature of the aging process, and that they don't cause any symptoms at all. So that if you see that abnormality on an MRI in somebody with back pain and you say, aha, you've got back pain, you've got this minor disc abnormality, the two must be connected, let's go to work on that, it's not necessarily true. So physicians, regrettably, even in 2016, are not 100% reliable in their understanding of this. And so that certainly there's no harm in looking into stress as a cause of your symptoms, pursuing some of the treatment recommendations, and find out if you get better from that. And if you do, then by all means continue.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I wanted to share too was, even if you find that your doctor is a little resistant, I have to say the people I've been sharing Dr. Clarke's work with, even if I haven't bought them the book, I've been sharing things that I've learned in the book. I could tell there's an inkling of recognition in it. And I suggest that if you've got that little inkling of recognition after hearing Dr. Clarke explain stress illness, follow it up with a qualified professional, because that inkling might be trying to tell you something, even if your own primary care or your major medical care is saying, well, no. If you've got that little inkling, it might be worth following it up. So, Dr. Clarke, tell us, I know that there's limited people out there that actually work in this field. You have a website that for the association that has some examples of people who can help, or some other work available on it. What is that website that people can find more information?
Yes, the website is PPD Association, all is one word, .org, and there is a directory of clinicians there all over the United States, and a few actually from overseas. And some of them are willing to treat people via Skype, so that you don't necessarily have to be local to where they are. There's only a handful of them at the moment, but like I say, some of them are willing to treat people who don't live in their communities. So that could be a resource for people.
At a minimum, if you've got that inkling, buy Dr. Clarke's book. They can't find anything wrong. Read it, and then you might be able to, as I did, put some little markers in it and take it to someone else who might be in the profession and be able to tell you, maybe we should follow up on that. Just saying, well, I really related to this story, or I wonder, this gave me some triggers or some thought processes. So that's another way to possibly introduce the idea of, do I have a stress illness, or could stress be making my symptoms worse even? And Dr. Clarke, how can they find out more about you? What your own website is, stressillness.com, right?
That's right, yes. And I should also point out, you're talking about the inkling, but the first patient in my book, she had no inkling at all that stress was a factor in her illness, and she had seen a dozen physicians at an excellent university and a psychiatrist as well as another physician, and still had no inkling that stress was involved. So I would encourage people who are not getting better with a treatment from their regular doctor to at least consider this as a possibility.
Wow, that's fascinating to me. Not even an inkling that could be an option. Wow, that is fascinating. So consider it regardless. Thank you for bringing that up. I had never considered that people might not even have an inkling that it could be causing part of their problem. Fascinating. This is such an amazing area of study that I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens as people begin to accept it more and more as a possibility. This is, to me, we're just on the cusp of understanding so much more about causes of illness. So fascinating. Dr. Clarke, any parting thoughts? And then I'll be sure and let you go, because I know you're such a busy person. I want to thank you so much for being part of the Autoimmune Hour again and sharing your wisdom. But any parting thoughts that you can share?
Well, I would just say it is a very exciting time in this field. We're hearing more and more recognition that stress-related illness is an important consideration, that we know it's afflicting 1 in 6 adults in the United States, which is nearly twice the size of the population of diabetics, and we finally have the research tools to make some real progress in this, and physicians are finally waking up to it, so it's a really exciting time in the field.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dave, for being on the show. Everyone, be sure and visit his website. It's stressillness.com. His book, They Can't Find Anything Wrong, 7 Keys to Understanding, Treating, and Healing Stress Illness, is available on his website as well as Amazon and other major booksellers. So it's available lots of places. I suggest getting it, reading it, and if you're like me, buying a few extra copies for friends and families, because I found it fascinating. Thank you so much, Dr. Clarke, my friend, and we'll talk soon. Everyone, have a great weekend, whatever your adventures, and always enjoy.
The information provided on lifeinterruptedradio.com is for educational purposes only. What you hear, read, and see on Life Interrupted Radio is based on experience only. The information presented here should never be used for any legal, diagnostic, or treatment purposes. Always seek sound legal, medical, and or professional advice regarding any problems, conditions, and any of the recommendations you see, hear, or read here on Life Interrupted Radio. You've been listening to Life Interrupted Radio. To learn more, listen to other shows, and gain free resources that can help empower your life, be sure to stop by lifeinterruptedradio.com. This episode is brought to you by mindfulnessinactionbook.com. To get your free 4-minute guided meditation to relax, refresh, and renew in just 4 minutes, and who doesn't have 4 minutes? Stop by mindfulnessinactionbook.com now. This guided meditation is in handy MP3 format, so you can use it anywhere, anytime. Download it now at mindfulnessinactionbook.com.
Do you want to be a better leader? Have better relationships? Become more self-aware? Be a better communicator? Hi, I'm Sharon Sayler, best-selling author, professional speaker, and executive coach. And my life passion is empowering professionals to be the best that they can be. After years of working with professionals, I've discovered the 7 things nobody is telling you that can cost you your clients, sales, and even your career. And I want to give it to you free. You've heard my show, you know my passion, and maybe we'll be working together sooner rather than later. So go grab this ebook now to find out the 7 things that's costing you big time over at SharonSayler.com/radio gift.
Research shows we apologize up to 10 times a day, and most of the time, we say sorry as a response to someone else's mistake. What if we thanked people instead of all that unnecessary apologizing? So instead of saying, sorry, I'm rambling, you say, thank you for listening. Join us at ProjectForgive.com, a free, non-religious resource on global forgiveness.